You know, in life, there are cars for driving and there are cars you dream about. When I was a kid, I dreamed of a Porsche, like a lot of kids, really. Except that I didn't dream of a 911 or a Carrera GT. Me, I dreamed of a Porsche with a front engine. And why? Because my grandfather had one. Actually, it was my first real car crush. I had already enjoyed looking at cars, but this, a Porsche. Actually, I had never looked at or gotten so close to a Porsche before. There was a Porsche in the family. For a kid who loves cars, it's wild. Whether it's a 924 or a 911 2.7 Carrera RS, it's all a Porsche to a kid. That was my first impression of the 944. I still remember seeing it for the first time. It was red, a Phase 2 with a black and white checkered interior, psychedelic like someone on LSD walked into a wallpaper shop and said, "I want that!" That stuck with me. I got in, I touched that hideous 4-spoke steering wheel, really ugly, and I thought, wow, one day I'll have one. And a few years later, I found this one in Poitiers. It was one of the cheapest on Le Bon Coin. It cost 8,500 euros, and that was still a lot of money for me at the time. Actually, even today, it still is. A Phase 1944 from 1985 with a 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engine, but with the turbo-look body kit, all in fiberglass, front bumper, and the 2 little rear skirts. It really looked very stylish. The interior had been completely redone by one of the 11 previous owners. This car really got around, actually, I feel like, between 85 and 2020. It hadn't been driven for at least 6 years. And then, little by little, I set myself a bit of a crazy mission to drive more than 5,000 kilometers in it with my buddies to get to Budapest, to simply do the Budapest Rally. This was one of my first real road trips and car adventures, and honestly, I only wanted to do it with the 944, my dream car, which would take me all the way across Europe. On paper, it sounds amazing. So we checked the injectors, we changed, thanks to John from Jab Concept, the timing and balance shaft belts, I rebuilt the brake calipers, I did a major overhaul. In short, I did a lot so we could travel 5,000 kilometers worry-free without hesitation. She ate up the road, the highway, like a damn queen, really, as if she were brand new. And then we started going over mountain passes to reach the Swiss border just before the Stelvio Pass, one of the most prestigious passes in the world. And guess what? During the climb up the last mountain, just before the Stelvio Pass, red warning light, the needle in the red, she stalls. Head gasket. So basically, the car was left abandoned for 3 or 4 weeks at a guest house in Switzerland just before heading to Italy. And then it was brought back to me. It took months and it cost me a lot. A nightmare. So I have a really bad experience with that car. And I told myself, well, no, see it through, motivate yourself. So we ended up at Epoche Auto, once again with John from Jab Concept. We changed the head gasket. It was a crazy experience, an incredible experience. Honestly, I'd do it again because we laughed so much. It was a wild experience. Now looking back, I realized that's what a front-engine Porsche is all about. It's a car with character, but when poorly maintained, it was worthless. At one point, it was worth only 400 bucks and nobody wanted it. So well, we're paying the price for it today. And because of all this crap, I've had to hear countless times, yeah, well, that's the poor man's Porsche. It's not really a Porsche, so it's kind of crap, right, Anthony? But honestly, that's not true. All of that is false. The poor man's Porsche, the crappy Porsche, it's not a Porsche. That's not true. That's not true. And I'm going to prove to you that this car has had an exceptional history and that it played a major role in the life of the Porsche automobile group. So today, we're going to go back in time. We're going to talk about the 924, which actually wasn't really a Porsche. We're going to talk about the 928, which was supposed to be the real replacement for the 911. And we're going to talk about the 944, which saved Porsche.
And about the 968, the swan song.
Forgotten. And I'm going to tell you how all these models brought something very significant to Porsche and why all these models transformed Porsche into the brand we all know today. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you why this Porsche 944, my Porsche 944, is now mint blue and how it changed my perception of automobiles.
Before I tell you the story of the front-engine Porsches, Anthony was supposed to talk to you more about the mechanics of his 944 to introduce the sponsor of this video. But obviously, since Anthony Perrier is as focused as a lizard sunbathing, he didn't think about it. So now, the voiceover, have to introduce this part instead of him because I have no choice. Professional YouTuber.
And from a mechanical point of view, it's still relatively reliable. Even though these cars are, let's say, quite prestigious, they're super reliable. Sure, there are a few minor issues with the 924s and the 944s, Actually, all cars have their issues, that's normal. For example, the Cagetronic injection system found on some of these models. Personally, I admit, I haven't had any trouble with it. I don't even have that injection system. I have a real injection system with 4 real injectors. I've never had any trouble with that. Of course, it's a car that sat unused for 6 years, and yes, it's true, a car that sits for 6 years is a car that deteriorates for 6 years. So a lot of maintenance had to be done, a lot of small repairs, and you might think that since it's a car that just turned 40, it's impossible to find parts. Well, actually, that's not the case at all. There are a lot of specialized websites where you can still find plenty of parts. Oh damn, what a car! Seriously, it's crazy! So yes, at the time, Porsche was living almost exclusively off the 911. There was a little bit of money coming in from the 914, but given the sale price, it wasn't anything spectacular. At that time, the 911 was for enthusiasts, but not really a car that was profitable. And the problem is that Porsche doesn't really have a profitable car that's cheap to produce and brings in money, and above all, the 911, even though it's sold at a high price, well, it's expensive to produce, of course. Usually those things go together. And above all, as time goes by, it's less and less compliant with future regulations in terms of pollution, crash tests, and so on. So it's going to become hard to sell. We need to find a solution before things go to shit. And here we are in 1972, 1973, and we have internal documents from Porsche that prove that even at Porsche, they're a bit doubtful about the long-term viability, if that's the right word, of the 911. We're thinking the 911 doesn't have a place anymore and isn't making money. At the time, Porsche was a large manufacturer, but mainly designed and developed for Volkswagen. Let's say that most of their money comes from Volkswagen, so you can imagine that at that time, if Volkswagen has a bit of a money problem, it immediately becomes a big money problem for Porsche. They have to react. So at that moment, yes, Porsche needed a plan B, they needed a car that would sell easily. A new business model, and especially a new audience, because for now, Porsche's customers are old folks, and old folks aren't the ones who bring in the most money. That's when the idea for an affordable, rear-wheel drive Porsche was born. Easy to get approved, easy to drive, that would attract a much wider range of customers. That's right, I'm talking about the Porsche 924, which originally wasn't a Porsche at all. We're at Volkswagen, and the project was called Project 425. The specifications are pretty simple. Front engine, liquid cooling, so nothing like a Porsche, affordable rear-wheel drive, and above all, not too sporty, but with a sporty look, a look Porsche. And although originally the 924 was supposed to be a Volkswagen Porsche project, a bit like the 914, in the end, Volkswagen decided to pull out of the game for economic reasons. They thought that developing a new car would be way too expensive for them, so they focused 100% on the Scirocco, which would be much cheaper to produce since it was actually built on the Golf platform. So Porsche bought the entire project and decided to release it under its own name, the Porsche 924. So it was no longer a Volkswagen Porsche, but really an entry-level Porsche, which would actually be produced in the Audi factory and not in the Porsche factory in Stuttgart. It was marketed starting in 1976. Congratulations and welcome to the 924. Now, the 924 has been a very controversial topic for purists because, first of all, it has an inline 4-cylinder engine and not a flat engine like all the other Porsches up until now, and more importantly, it's not just any engine. It's a 2-liter, 125 horsepower engine that comes from Audi. It's not a Porsche engine. However, Porsche still made the effort to rework the cylinder head to make it a bit sportier. And here, same thing, another innovation. We have a gearbox that's installed on the rear axle, and it's a gearbox that was originally a front-wheel drive gearbox, and actually it's an Audi gearbox. They cut costs wherever possible, and I think it works well because putting the engine in front and the gearbox in back creates good weight distribution. So, right there, you're already getting an engine from Audi, a gearbox from Audi that already exists on production models. So obviously, it's much cheaper to produce, and as a result, it sells for much less. And strangely enough, this little formula that doesn't really appeal to purists actually works very well. It started to attract young people, people who weren't Porsche customers at all, or even premium car buyers, and also real car enthusiasts who dreamed of a 911 but couldn't afford one. So this was Porsche's very first massive success, and damn, what a revival. It's really nice, the engineers can finally relax a little, and so they say, well, it's working, let's put a turbo in it. Because yes, indeed, the performance gap between a 924 with 125 horsepower and a 911 is huge. So they'll have to find a little recipe to fill the gap, and that's when Porsche releases the 924 Turbo. The engine is slightly reworked, as well as the chassis and the body. It reaches 170 horsepower at first, then 177 horsepower, and already it's starting to get really nice. And at that point, even the Porsche aficionados start to recognize a bit of the Porsche DNA. It's becoming a sports car again. And just that little bit of information means that yes, Porsche is starting to be on the right track to start making money again, to please the Porsche fans. Whoa there. No, a 944 is sporty. A 944 is really sporty. Hey, it's not a fighter jet, but it goes really well. Before I get to the 944, let me talk about the 928, which is sort of the middle option in the lineup. Yeah, so I was telling you about the 928. Yes, so it came after the 924. And by the way, I think you got it. 924, 4 cylinders. 928 is above that, 8 cylinders. Yeah, the first Porsche with a V8. Why? Well, they thought that selling a car with an architecture simpler than a flat 6 would probably appeal to people and would probably show up in sales. Well, especially in the United States, because in the United States you can imagine that the V8 reigns supreme. And it works. Because yeah, let's not forget, we're really in a period where Porsche is thinking, we're going to replace the 911. So the 928 was technically supposed to be the replacement for the 911. Much more modern design, V8, water cooling, poly bumpers, streamlined, stuff like that. Well, basically plastic, a super futuristic design, an interior that's kind of sci-fi, headlights that are a bit retractable, kind of pop up like on the 924, but much more futuristic. And then comfort, steering, soundproofing like never seen before in a Porsche. Here we're talking about a real GT. We're clearly looking at a modern 911 Carrera in terms of its place in the lineup. Ah, something's happening here. In terms of engine, the 928 has V8s. The first V8 was a 4.5-liter V8 with 240 horsepower, but very quickly, that wasn't enough to satisfy the customers, you know. So the car ended up having 8 different engine versions, all the way up to the peak with the 928 GTS and its 5-liter V8. 5 liters, I think. I'm doing this from memory, you know, which made 350 horsepower. That's really not bad at all, honestly. Roughly speaking, the 928 brought a lot of technological advancements. I've said that, but above all, it was a totally new position in the lineup. It's the first Porsche you could really consider luxurious. It's the first Porsche you could consider a GT, but in the way we understand it today, like I explained to you. And also, oh yeah, it's also the first Porsche with ABS offered as standard, and that's great, you know. Except that at the same time, the 911 is still around. Porsche can't manage to phase out the 911. Why? Because actually 911 customers love the 911. So they say, well, we make models, we produce them, we sell them well, but at the same time, okay, we keep making the 911. The 911 is dangerous, unbalanced, costly, and hard to maintain, yet people still want it. Also, the 928 is supposed to be rational. It's expensive and a hassle compared to a 911. It's not very fun, but it's powerful, luxurious, and rational, though still a pain. It's great for long distances, but it's not good for lap times, and honestly, it's just too expensive. The GTS version I was just telling you about earlier, in the United States, was sold for over $100,000, which made it one of the most expensive cars you could drive on the road. It's a Porsche 928, you know. It's nice, yeah, but it's too expensive for what it is, so its price really contributed to its downfall, and that's why it sold less and less well over time. But it's still an excellent car. Besides, as a car enthusiast myself, I know a lot of automotive journalists. I follow a lot of automotive journalists, including Jeremy Clarkson. And I think everyone has seen that review by Jeremy Clarkson of the 928. And in that segment, he says that for him, the 928 is really one of the best Porsches the brand has ever made. Literally, no less than that. And at the time he filmed that footage, it was simply his favorite Porsche. In fact, there's a rather moving excerpt where he talks about his dad, who is on his deathbed. And he says that if he didn't have a car that could safely drive at 170 miles per hour, he probably would never have been able to say goodbye to his dad. If you've never seen that clip, I encourage you to look it up on the internet. It's very easy to find. And I think it sums up the philosophy of the 928 quite well. So, why did I bring the 944 to talk about all this? It's because this is where the 944 comes into play. It's 1982 and Porsche releases this car to address the flaws of the 924. The one people call a poor man's Porsche, say isn't a real Porsche, claim lacks a Porsche engine, and consider too low-end to be a Porsche. Now you get a 2.5-liter engine, 100% Porsche. By the way, the 2.5-liter four-cylinder block is strange. Well, it's simply half of the 5-liter V8 from the 928. I love sharing this fact at dinners with friends who always react, "Wow, that's crazy!" Yeah, and if you look closely when you open the hood of the 944, well, you can really see that the inline four-cylinder is completely tilted. Like literally, as if it was a piece of a V8. You see, the block is like this here. It's crazy. Anyway, now that I've raved a bit about this marvel of engineering that is this 2.5-liter four-cylinder, so what is the 944? Well, basically, it's a mid-range model between the 924 and the 928, still produced in the Audi factory to keep costs down, but with Porsche parts, that was the formula. Damn, it's really muscular. Did you see the rear fenders? It's nothing like that little 924 toy. No, honestly, for me, this is the quintessence of the front-engine Porsche. You can't do better. Well, there are much better ones, but in my eyes, you can't do better. But seriously, can we talk about the light and the setting here? I really didn't expect to see such lighting when I came to shoot here. It's crazy! So basically, for all the skeptics of front-engine Porsches, well, Porsche proves that everyone was wrong. The 924 became the best-selling Porsche of the 80s. It far surpassed the 911. Oh, it's a huge hit. Clearly, it's a huge hit. I think it's almost 100,000 units produced. That's really massive. In terms of engine, we have the 2.5-liter, 8 valves for the Classic, 2.5-liter, 16 valves for the S with 190 horsepower. And then we had the 3-liter in the S2. The 3-liter is crazy. It's 204 horsepower. And here, we're talking about a real car that's starting to get very serious. No, it's 211 horsepower, not 204, 211, I can't remember. Yeah, 211, that's it. Yes, I got it right. So, I've never tested that one, but I've always been told it's a damn monster with crazy torque. It's got insane driving pleasure. I'd really like to test one someday. I think that in 3 liters, 16 valves is really something crazy. And above that, of course, there's the turbo version. And by the way, this one has the full body kit with the turbo's front bumper and the 2 little rear skirts from the turbo. Basically, the turbo is exactly the same base as this one. It's the 2.5-liter naturally aspirated 2.5-liter with a turbo added, still an 8 valve. We didn't put a lot of effort into it. And basically, the major modifications on the engine are the pistons, obviously, for compression, the oil pump to send more oil for the turbo, and of course, a turbo. Here, we reach 220 horsepower on the turbo version. Then, on the Phase 2 or on the Turbo S, 250 horsepower thanks to a slightly bigger turbo. It's really a fighter jet. There was also the 944 Turbo Cup version, which was made for small championships, things like that. And that for sure, it's a war. It's war. It's a fighter jet. It's crazy. It's stripped out, roll cage, the whole deal. Yeah, that one, oh, tough, really tough. Yeah. It's 1991 and Porsche brings out the 968. I almost forgot. 968. It's the last transaxle Porsche. Transaxle, what's that word? Quick vocabulary lesson. Transaxle means the engine is in front, the gearbox is in back, and a shaft connects them, spinning at crankshaft speed. It's like having a 3-meter-long crankshaft. And to keep everything in check, there are bearings all along a big beam that starts at the engine where the clutch bell housing is and goes all the way to the gearbox in the back. There are lots of bearings inside and it keeps everything together in one single unit. It's actually pretty well put together, to be honest. The weight distribution is always pretty crazy. In fact, on the 944, it's 50-50. There's no 50-50. It's a crazy car. Honestly, it's a crazy car. Basically, the 968 was supposed to be the ultimate evolution of the 944. In fact, if you compare them, they're exactly the same cars. The taillights are different, and the front end changes to a much more modern front that looks a lot more like that of a Porsche 959 or a 911 993. I think there's even an ad. That's from memory. Careful, I think there's even an ad. It was oddly translated from English, something like $1 million face. But from the front, a 968 looks a lot like a 959, especially in white. You have to admit, they're basically the same cars. Anyway, originally, the 968 wasn't supposed to be called 968. It was supposed to be called 944 S3 to really be the final version. A tribute, call it whatever you want, to the 944 and the front-engine Porsches. Because yes, it's the very last front-engine Porsche, and that's a real shame. For me, the 968 is the best of all the front-engine Porsches. It's the most refined. It's not just my opinion, it's simply the truth. It's the most refined front-engine Porsche. By the way, it wasn't produced at Audi at all, but it was actually made at Porsche in Stuttgart, because at this point, there isn't a single Audi or Volkswagen part left, nothing like that. It's almost 100%. Hey, it's a Porsche. It's a Porsche. And by the way, the 968 was the only front-engine Porsche with a Tiptronic gearbox, with like a sequential shift and everything on the gear lever. So really, a well-developed and truly modern car. Well, the thing is, we're kind of at the end of the front-engine Porsche era. People realized it was running out of steam a bit. That's it, man, we get it. Give us a nice 911 instead. And so, the sales of the 968 weren't great, so Porsche, to try to boost sales a bit, released the Club Sport version. Basically, it's a lighter 968, no radio, nothing. Just an optional limited slip differential, big brakes. You can get a roll cage as an option. It's starting to be a bit of a crazy car, actually. And it's selling well. It even sells better than the basic 968. The reason is actually pretty simple. It's cheaper than the base version. Why is it cheaper than the base version? Simply because there's nothing inside. There are no features. There's less development, less time spent on production basically, so it's cheaper. You might think, but that's not the recipe for success at all. Well, actually it is. Like I said, the Club Sport sold more units than the standard version, which I find really completely crazy. The 968 also has the ultimate engine from the 944, the S2, the 3-liter 16-valve, except it's boosted to 240 horsepower. That's becoming impressive for a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, especially for that time. Naturally aspirated, guys, we're almost there. Wait, the plane. It makes you look up. Women, 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 it makes you look up. Well, now we're getting closer and closer to the year 1995. A pivotal year when Porsche completely stopped producing and selling front-engine Porsches. Why? Because damn, man, have you seen the front-engine Porsches we're stuck with? Originally, it was supposed to be affordable. We end up with luxury 968s that have 240 horsepower, even 305 horsepower for the turbo version. Well, which actually sold not just 14 units. I don't know why. Maybe because it was way too expensive. And yes, we're definitely in the same segment as a 911. The engine is in the front and the gearbox is in the back. Alright, but in the end, it's the same price, the same performance, the same social status. Then it just doesn't sell anymore, actually. It just doesn't sell anymore. And above all, the mid-90s was once again a financial crisis. The people with money, well, there weren't many of them. At least fewer than before, potentially. And those who had money wanted a 911. They didn't want a 968. What kind of stupid car is that? You know what I mean? And for good reason. Actually, in 1995, the Porsche lineup was really chaotic. There was the 911 Type 993, which had only arrived 2 years earlier and was already available in I don't know how many different versions. The 928 was on its way out. The 924 was already gone. The 944 was already gone. All we had left was the 968. The lineup, well, it's weird, you know? It's pointless. That means that basically, at the end of 95, there was only one car left in the catalog, the 911. So Porsche created its front-engine models to replace the 911. And in the end, the 911 replaced the front-engine models. Guys! And so, do you know what happens in 1996 alongside the 911? A new car with a kind of weird platform. It's not a front engine, but it's a mid-engine car. The Porsche Boxster 986. Once again, the purists cried heresy. Once again, a weird model that saved the brand. Well, honestly, I'm making it a bit of a joke here. I'm not going to lie to you, it's true. But still, the front-engine models saved Porsche. And that, I think a lot of people have forgotten. They're starting to remember now, little by little, because the value has gone up. So the guys are like, this is the car that saved Porsche. It's worth at least 45,000 euros. It's the turbo version, guys. I paid 8.5 for mine. It used to be worth about $1,000. If you broke something, you just bought another one. Purists, calm down. Basically, the front-engine models brought financial stability and taught Porsche how to do luxury and comfort, things it didn't really have before them. The transaxle platform, which is really great, but they never used it again. The modern Porsche clientele, meaning young people and not old geezers who wet themselves. The concept of GT, which we obviously still have today, but which we didn't have before the front-engine models. So, it's like the Panamera and Taycan philosophy, since in the end, they're not really Porsches either. And above all, they saved the 911, which I think was one of the reasons many business leaders got up in the morning. Having a 911, damn, that's impressive. Ironically, those boxy front-engine Porsches with pop-up headlights actually saved the 911. Without them, the 911 we have in 2025 wouldn't exist. I think that's a crazy story. By the way, I think this is a good time to draw a parallel between this story and 9/11. Because believe it or not, the whole story I've told you in this video takes place between 1972 and 1995. That's still quite a few years. At least 6 or 7 at the lower end. And actually, when the 924 arrived, it coexisted with the 911 Type G. It was getting a bit old, a bit sluggish, except for the turbo version, which was just a machine for killing people. That car was completely crazy, still air-cooled. And people were like, bro, come on, isn't it time to put some water in your engines? And in the end, the arrival of the nasty, big, mean front-engine cars that wanted to push Porsche out, they didn't push out anything. Because while they were around, Porsche released the 911 964, which is an awesome car. By the way, guys were complaining that the Type G was getting old because air cooling wasn't great. And then they released another air-cooled car. And then they released another air-cooled car. And then they finally put water in it. And everyone was complaining because no, a 911 is supposed to be air-cooled. Oh man, those Porsche fans. And at the end of the story, it turns out it's not the 911 that's too expensive to produce, but the 968 that's too expensive to produce. They stopped it to add more money to the 911 993. The whole story is weird. Then another financial crisis happens, as I mentioned. The Boxster is released, upsetting purists. Years later, the Cayenne debuts, and purists are furious. And actually, it's just a pattern that repeats endlessly. It's making cars that sell so you can have fun selling cars that don't sell, or barely sell. It's hilarious. So there you go, the story of Porsche's front-engine cars is really a chapter in Porsche's history that many people wanted to forget. But it's still a really important parenthesis because basically, in the 80s, as you probably understood from this video, it's thanks to the front-engine Porsche cars that Porsche is still around today in the end. So it's actually a really important parenthesis in Porsche's history. And it's also a really important parenthesis in my story. Because this car, as you can tell, is my first real nice ride. It's my first Porsche. I've had some crazy experiences with this car. I did the Budapest rally. I wanted to burn it many times because it was a real piece of junk when I got it. Let's be honest. And today, that's it. The chapter that started when I bought it in Poitiers is closing now in Valence. I say that because actually I wasn't even the one who decided to repaint this car. So it's a color that I love, but actually it was Loris who wanted to repaint the car.
Hi.
Well done. The color is beautiful.
I love it.
So Loris, you probably recognize him, the guy with the Mercedes station wagon. He was the one behind that little trick that ended up costing me a lot because I did a lot of tuning.
You did a lot of tuning, but it's a beautiful car.
Exactly. And I'm glad to see that today you're the one who did a lot of tuning.
Exactly.
BMW color.
Mint green.
Mint green. BMW. And actually, the reason he allowed himself to repaint the car is simply because this car, well, it's his own. That's how... Oh yes, that's true.
Here's the key to your new one.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.